So what sort of research do you start to go do?
So he was looking kind of specifically, so he had some human trials and then we had more like mechanistic data that he was looking at, like in terms of, okay, it seems like this amino acid leucine is important for muscle protein synthesis. We have a lot of mechanistic data showing that if you give leucine, it increases muscle protein synthesis. But as a part of like whole diets or complete protein sources, does it actually matter, right? That was kind of one of the questions that he had. And so when I came in, we talked about the research he was doing, where he thought I could fit in. And I was very interested in that question as well. And so, for example, like I would say the best study I did, or the one I'm most proud of, is we fed like different types of protein. And these are lab rats, right? But rat is actually a very good model for human protein metabolism. And our results got validated in humans later. We fed wheat, soy, egg, and whey, but same calories, same total protein. And we looked at, all right, is there a difference in like protein synthesis and actually like muscle mass as well? We did a longer term study. And we're actually able to show that like, yes, muscle protein synthesis was different. And it was mostly based off the leucine contents of those different protein sources. So the takeaway was, you know, it's not just the bioavailability of a protein, or another measure is what's called PDCAS. It's also the leucine content of the protein makes a difference in terms of like how anabolic it is to muscle tissue. And even
so, is it safe to say like if you ate like a meal and then followed it up with some leucine, it'd be better, it'd be more efficient for building muscle?
Yeah, I mean, you could, but I mean, if you're a bodybuilder, like I tell people, if you're eating like, you know, 1 gram per pound of body weight, kind of the old school, you don't need an extra on top of it.
What if you're like super trying to be try hard and like get lean and like maintain muscle mass? Is that when it matters more?
You know, the research on supplemental leucine, it just doesn't really seem to show anything, because mostly, unless you're like low protein, and then it probably helps. But if you're getting in enough protein, it seems to not really make a difference.
So overall, so this, because I wanted to talk to you about
but
this.
It does, let me put a caveat there. It does make a difference in terms of like, so let's take like people doing a plant-based diet, right? One aspect of that is, now you can build as much muscle on a plant-based diet as you can on a omnivore diet. You just got to pay a little more attention
to your sources.
Yeah, because one, the protein in plant material is bound up in the fibrous material of the plant, like the intact plant sources. Yeah. So let's say you're eating like beans or legumes or whatnot, and then they can have a decent amount of protein, like 16 grams. But it's only about 70-80% bioavailable, because it's bound up in that fibrous material and not accessible to some of your digestive enzymes. And it tends to be lower in essential amino acids and leucine. So what I tell people is, if you're plant-based, you know, you probably need, you know, an extra 10-20% protein total to get kind of the same amount of high quality protein that you'd get if you were like omnivore. Yeah. Okay. And you can do it, but I think most, you know, vegans, if they're looking to build muscle, would do well to kind of supplement with like some kind of isolated protein powder, just because it makes it a lot easier.
I see. So I kind of want to get into this conversation about like counting your macros and relationship to like, you know, everyone's like, oh, all it matters is if I just eat enough, right? Like, so when we talk about like, you know, let's say, because I always get into this like conversation with people and they're like, what do I eat? And it's like, there is like this overall calories in, calories out, right? But then beyond that, like the sources of like carbs, for example, have to have an effect. You know how like I'll hear stuff where people are like, they're just eating like candy or this and that, but it's like, but it's in the macros, so it's fine. Yeah. I'm like, how is that really affecting the body? Because at the end of the day, that's not taking into account blood sugar.
Yeah. So it does have an effect, probably not in the way that a lot of people think. So from a completely like just mechanistic perspective, like body composition perspective, right?
Yeah.
And they've done like really highly controlled studies where they've done like, say, high sugar versus low sugar. There was one study where they like provided all the food to participants. One group was getting 10 grams of sugar a day. Another group was getting over 100. Both were in a calorie deficit. Both were consuming same calories, same protein.
So macros were the same.
Macros were the same.
Okay.
And they lost the same amount of weight, same amount of fat, retained same amount of lean mass.
Holy
Both improved, had similar improvements in blood markers of health, like
even blood markers were the same.
yeah. The only thing that was a little bit different was LDL improved in both groups. It improved just a little bit more in the low sugar group. That's probably though because they had more fiber, and fiber can lower LDL cholesterol.
Okay.
But so what I will say is, now that being said, I don't think it's a good idea to purposefully consume a lot of sugar, right?
Yeah.
But from a mechanistic perspective, if you eat carbohydrate, it winds up as sugar anyway when it gets to your bloodstream. And if you look at something like fruit, it's got a lot of fiber, but also has a lot of sugar, right? But we know that like people who eat more fruit are healthier, live longer, have lower rates of cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
So one of the things I tell people is sugar isn't necessarily the problem. It's the fact that if you're eating a lot of sugar, you're probably eating pretty low fiber as well. So balance the two, right? Yeah. Now, if you're eating a lot of candy and stuff, like you're not going to get enough fiber in. No and way. Fiber is really important, not just for cardiovascular disease risk, cancer risk, mortality. Like there was a recent meta-analysis, which is just for in plain speak, is basically a study of studies. Okay, so they have certain inclusion criteria, and they basically say any study that fits this inclusion criteria, so similar studies, we're going to lump them all in together and see what the overall effect is, right? So they're going to combine those data points.
So it's like the most effective sort of
It's kind of like the highest form of evidence.
The meta. So it's like when people are playing Call of Duty, they get the meta guns. It's like that's the gun set.
Yeah. I mean, you can do a bad meta-analysis, but for the most part, when we look at like meta-analyses, they're considered kind of the highest standard of evidence. So what they found was that just under the total data points was just under 1 million people in all these studies. And they found that each 10-gram increase in fiber had a corresponding 10% decrease in the risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. Now, it's important to point out, eating 100 grams of fiber a day is not going to make you immortal, right? Because I can see people doing that math, right?
I'm never going to die.
It's a relative risk. So when
fiber is that important?
Yes. So when we say, well, we think so.
Yeah.
When we say risk, we mean relative risk. So for example, if you're 60 years old, for example, and your absolute risk of dying in the next 10 years is say, let's just say 10%, right? Yeah. A 10% relative risk reduction is going from 10 to 9%.
10% of your 10%.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So when you see these headlines like X increases cancer risk by 15% or this, your absolute cancer risk, I think, is something like around 5%. Like it's going up to 5.5. Like it's not like you just massively jumped up, right? Now, important, but again, fiber is so helpful for one, satiety.
Feeling full.
Yeah, feeling of fullness. Two, it really, I think a lot of the effect on cancer risk is just specifically on colorectal cancer, so colon cancer. Fiber has a very strong effect on reducing colon cancer risk. And colon cancer is one of the more common cancers out there. Yeah. So when you reduce the risk of colon cancer, you see an effect overall. And then fiber also can lower LDL cholesterol, and we think that's one of the ways in which it reduces cardiovascular disease risk. And we now know also based on the gut microbiome research that fiber, especially soluble fiber, is one of the main fuels for the gut microbiome, for the bacteria there. And people who eat more fiber tend to have a more diverse and healthier gut microbiome. And the fermentation products, so soluble fiber used to be referred to as fermentable fiber. Yeah. Because your bacteria can ferment it and produce gas, short-chain fatty acids, which are like butyrate, propionate. Those short-chain fatty acids seem to have some pretty impressive health effects, like in terms of improving insulin sensitivity, lowering inflammation, some really impressive stuff. So all that umbrella is probably why we see these effects with fiber. So all that circling back to, it's
the sources of carbohydrates.
For your body composition, could you build as much muscle and lose as much fat eating candy if you hit your macros? based on the evidence we have, it would say yeah, but you probably wouldn't want to do it that way. One, you'd be really hungry, if you, especially on a diet, if you're consuming a high sugar diet,
blood
right?
sugar crashes, yeah.
Well, not even that. Just, think about volume, right? Think about 300 calories from a Snicker versus 300 calories from a big ass salad, right?
Yeah, it's way faster.
Way different.
Yeah.
Gut fill, gut hormone secretion, all those sorts of things. In fact, a lot of these gut hormones actually that tell us that we're full respond to stretch.
Yeah.
So, volume.